The Vorkai Dominion had existed for 847 years. It was the oldest continuous empire in the known galaxy. Older than the Galactic Council itself, though the Council would never admit that. Older than most of the species it had conquered. The Vorkai had been building their dominion while other civilizations were still learning to light fires. On this day, they were celebrating their 600th year of uninterrupted expansion. The throne room of the Vorkai homeworld sat at the heart of the capital city of Zetharavor. It had been carved from obsidian harvested from the heart of a dead star, a mining operation that had cost 8,000 Vorkai workers their lives over 14 years of extraction. The ceiling rose 200 meters high. Torches burned in iron sconces every 12 meters along the walls, though the room needed no light. The obsidian itself seemed to glow from within, a deep red-black like old blood held up to a flame. The air smelled like old iron and the sweet smoke of ceremonial incense. The incense had been burning continuously for 600 years. No one remembered when it had been lit. No one had ever let it go out. Emperor Vexarin sat on his throne. He was 847 years old. His scales had faded from the deep black of his youth to a pale gunmetal gray. His eyes were yellow and ancient, and they had seen more conquest than any living being in the galaxy. He wore the crown of subjugation, a ring of twisted metal forged from the melted weapons of 12 defeated species. Each species had been offered a choice: surrender their weapons to the throne or have them taken from their cold hands. All 12 had chosen the latter. Behind the throne hung the banners of 43 star systems. Each banner was woven from the silk of a conquered homeworld. Each one represented a war that the Vorkai had started and finished. Each one had been added to the collection on the day of formal surrender. The banners hung in chronological order. The oldest was 600 years old, faded, almost translucent. The newest was 47 days old, a system called Vorithkai, a small civilization of 200 million souls who had lasted 3 days against the Vorkai war machine. General Druoth stood at the Emperor's right hand. He was 312 years old. His scales were black and polished. A scar ran across his left jaw, a wound from a duel 140 years ago, a challenge he had answered with a plasma blade. He had won. The challenger's skull now sat on a spike in the Hall of Conquerors, 12 rows back, fourth from the left. Druoth had personally commanded 9 successful campaigns. He had taken 6 worlds. He had never lost a battle. He did not intend to start now. The court had gathered to hear the annual report. 472 Vorkai nobles filled the obsidian chamber. They stood in silence, arranged by rank, their breathing the only sound besides the crackle of the torches. Behind them, pressed against the far wall, sat the diplomatic attachés from 14 subjugated species, observers, recorders, witnesses. They were allowed to watch. They were not allowed to speak. Kurasal sat among them. She was Kavani. Her species had been annexed 40 years ago when she was 28 years old. She had been a librarian before the war. She had cared for 40,000 books on her homeworld's great archive, a building made of white stone and glass that had stood for 2,000 years. The Vorkai had burned it. She did not know why. They had not asked for the books. They had simply arrived, demanded surrender. And when the Kavani defense forces lasted 11 days instead of the expected 3, the Vorkai had burned the archive as a lesson. She had been the recorder for 40 years. Her job was to write down what happened, not to interpret, not to judge, to write. She carried a data slate that had survived 3 purges. She had hidden it in a ventilation shaft during the first, under a floor panel during the second, inside the body of a dead friend during the third. The slate contained 40 years of Vorkai history, every battle, every surrender, every banner added to the wall. She wrote everything. General Druoth stepped forward. His boots echoed on the obsidian floor, 4 steps, then a pause, then 4 more. The rhythm was deliberate. It had been rehearsed. Everything in the Vorkai court was rehearsed. "Your Majesty," Druoth said. His voice echoed off the black walls. The acoustics had been engineered so that a single voice would fill the entire chamber without amplification. The architect had been executed after the room was completed, a tradition. No one could know how the room worked, only the Vorkai. "The Dominion has grown by 4 systems this cycle," Druoth continued. "Total conquered systems, 47. Total losses, 0. We remain undefeated." The court applauded. It was not a wild applause. Vorkai did not applaud wildly. It was a measured, rhythmic clapping, 3 beats, repeated 7 times. The tradition had been established 500 years ago by an emperor who believed that wild applause was undignified. No one had changed it. No one would. Emperor Vexarin did not applaud. He sat on his throne, his yellow eyes scanning the room slowly, deliberately, the way a predator scans a field of prey. His gaze moved across the banners, all 43 of them, and then stopped. There was a blank section of the wall. It was a space between the 47th banner and the 48th. The space had been empty for 47 days, ever since Vorithkai had fallen, but there was room for more. There was always room for more. "The humans," Vexarin said quietly. The room went silent. Druoth's scarred jaw tightened. He had been expecting this. He had been preparing for this for 6 months. Your Majesty, Druoth said carefully, the humans occupy a small territory on the outer rim of Sector 14. They possess approximately 89 military vessels, most of which are outdated by Vorkai standards. They have been spacefaring for only 300 years. They are a death world, Vexarin interrupted. Druoth paused. Yes, Your Majesty, their homeworld is classified as a Category 7 death world. High gravity, extreme weather, predatory biology. They are. Tough, Vexarin said. Hardy, Druoth agreed carefully, but not sophisticated. Their military doctrine is. Have we fought them? Druoth hesitated. No, Your Majesty. Have we tested them? No, Your Majesty. Vexarin leaned forward slightly. His ancient scales caught the torchlight. Then how do you know they are weak? Druoth opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The reports from the Galactic Council indicate. The Galactic Council, Vexarin said, has existed for 9,000 years. In that time they have fought exactly 0 wars. They are bureaucrats. They collect species like stones. They have no military. They have no teeth. I do not care what their reports indicate. He stood. The court went completely silent. Even the torches seemed to burn lower. Prepare an ultimatum, Vexarin said. Standard terms. Surrender of military assets within 72 hours, protectorate status, compliance will be catalogued, resistance will result in complete annihilation. Send it to their homeworld. Druoth bowed. As you command, Your Majesty. And Druoth's. Yes, Your Majesty. Vexarin turned to look at the blank space on the wall, the space where the 48th banner would hang. Make sure they understand, this is not a negotiation. Kurisal wrote it all down. She wrote about the 847 years. She wrote about the 600 years of expansion. She wrote about the 47 systems. She wrote about the 12 melted weapons. She wrote about the 9 campaigns. She wrote about the 6 worlds. She wrote about the 40 years of her own service. She wrote about the blank space on the wall. And she wrote about the humans, the death world species that Emperor Vexarin had decided to test. She knew nothing about them. She had never met a human. The Kavani had never interacted with Earth. But she wrote their name in her data slate, and she felt something she had not felt in 40 years. She felt curiosity. The ultimatum arrived on Earth 9 days later. It was delivered by drone, no ambassador, no courtesy, no warning. The drone had been launched from a Vorkai scout ship that entered the Sol system's outer boundary, broadcast the message on all known human frequencies, and then retreated to the edge of the system to wait for a response. The message read, the Vorkai Dominion claims sovereignty over all human territories. You will surrender your military assets within 72 hours. You will be catalogued as a protectorate population. Resistance will result in complete annihilation. This is not a negotiation. Admiral Mayra Vasquez read the message in her office at Fleet Headquarters. The office was small. The walls were gray, the same shade of gray that every office in the building had been painted for 50 years. There was a desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked out at a parking lot, and a photograph on the desk. The photograph showed a man in a naval uniform. He was standing on the deck of a ship, a steel ship ancient with canvas bags of coffee stacked behind him and a .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the railing. The man was her grandfather. He had sailed the Pacific in World War II on a ship called the USS Maddox. He had survived 3 kamikaze attacks, 2 typhoons, and 1 friendly fire incident. He had come home with a Bronze Star and a piece of shrapnel in his left leg that he never bothered to remove. He had told her once, the only people who brag about never losing are the people who have never fought anyone dangerous. She was 61 years old. She had been in the fleet for 39 years. She had gray hair now cut short, practical. She had the kind of face that did not move much when she was thinking, a face that had learned stillness the way other faces learned laughter. She had been waiting for this message for 22 years. She picked up her coffee. It was black cold, the 3rd cup of the morning. She drank it anyway. She did not believe in wasting coffee. Her grandfather had taught her that too. She stood up. She put on her coat, not her dress uniform, but her grandfather's old naval coat. Faded blue wool with brass buttons that had been polished so many times they had lost their engraving. She had worn it to 7 funerals. She had worn it when she signed 12 letters to the families of friends who had died in training accidents. She walked to the war room. The war room was 3 levels below ground. It had no windows. It had 2 entrances, both secured by biometric locks that required 2 forms of identification and a verbal passcode that changed every 4 hours. The room measured 30 meters by 20 meters. The ceiling was 4 meters high. The walls were covered in tactical displays, 12 of them, each 2 meters wide, arranged in a semicircle around a central command platform. 32 people were in the war room. Captain Elias Cole stood at the central tactical display. He was 49 years old. He had short dark hair going gray at the temples. His hands were scarred, a training accident 14 years ago, a plasma conduit that had overheated and exploded while he was running a simulation. He had lost 2 fingers on his left hand. They had been replaced with synthetic ones that worked fine but did not have fingerprints. He had been in the fleet for 27 years. He had commanded the Black Manticore for 11 of those years. LT, Commander Sana Yoon sat at the intelligence station. She was 38 years old. She had been in fleet intelligence for 16 years. She had discovered the discrepancy in the Galactic Registry 8 years ago, 47 ship names that had been filed with the Galactic Council 187 years ago, and then buried so deep in a bureaucratic subclause that no species had ever read them. She had spent 6 months verifying that the ships actually existed. They did. She had spent another 2 years tracking Vorkai supply lines through 12 critical choke points. She had mapped them all. Petty Officer Marcus Webb stood at the back of the room near the medical station. He was 29 years old. He had been a combat medic for 11 years. He carried a photograph of his daughter inside his helmet liner, a 4-year-old girl with a gap-toothed smile and a stuffed animal she had named Space Bear. He had not seen her in 11 months. He did not complain about this. He was a professional. Yoon spoke first. "Admiral, we have confirmed the Vorkai fleet composition," she said. Her voice was steady. She had been practicing this report for 8 years. 1,200 capital ships, 3 assault fleets, 300,000 ground troops. They are currently massing at the edge of the system, approximately 9 hours from Earth's orbital defense perimeter. Vasquez set down her coffee. "Wake the Black Register," she said. The room went silent. Cole looked at her, his scarred hands tightened on the edge of the tactical display. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "that's 187 years of silence." Vasquez looked at him, her face did not move. "I know." She turned to the display. The 12 screens showed the Vorkai fleet, 1,200 red icons arranged in perfect formation, approaching the outer system at 0.3 times light speed. "Send the reply," she said. "What reply, ma'am?" Yoon asked. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the tactical displays and the distant vibration of the building's environmental systems. "Tell them we accept their terms," she said. The reply was 4 words. It was sent on an open channel broadcast to every Vorkai ship in the system. It read, "We accept your terms." General Druoth read the message on the bridge of his flagship, the Vengeance of Vexar. He was standing at the main display, his scarred jaw tight, his hands clasped behind his back. The bridge crew watched him in silence. He laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a predator who had just watched prey walk into a trap. "They accept," he said to the War Council. "Good. They understand their position." The War Council consisted of 9 Vorkai officers, each commanding a division of the fleet. They nodded, they smiled. They had been expecting this. Humans were primitives, death world or not, they knew when they were beaten. Kurasal was not on the bridge. She was in the recorder's chamber, a small room adjacent to the bridge, 3 meters by 4 meters, with a single chair, a single desk, and a single window that looked out at the stars. She sat at the desk. Her data slate was open. She wrote down the message, "We accept your terms." She wrote down Druoth's reaction, laughter. And then she noticed something. The human message had not said surrender. It had said accept your terms. Those were not the same thing. She wrote that down too. The Black Register was not a fleet. It was a registry. A list of 47 ship names that had been filed with the Galactic Council 187 years ago, during a period of bureaucratic reorganization that no species remembered and no historian had ever studied. The list had been submitted by a human diplomat named Elias Vance, a man who had died 140 years ago, whose grave was in a small cemetery in Virginia, whose headstone read only, "He prepared." The 47 names had been buried in a subclause of Subclause 14, Section 9, Paragraph 3 of the Galactic Council's Procedural Regulations for Military Asset Disclosure. The subclause was 1,400 words long. It had been written in a language no species spoke anymore. It had been reviewed by exactly 0 people before it was filed. No one had ever read it. The ships on the list had been built in secret over decades, in shipyards hidden inside asteroid fields and behind gas giants. Each ship had been constructed by a different team, using a different design to prevent any single leak from revealing the full scope of the program. The construction had taken 47 years, 1 year per ship on average, though some had taken longer. The Black Manticore had taken 3 years. The Silent Hammer had taken 11 months. The Last Argument had taken 6 months, a record that still stood. Each ship had a crew. Each crew had trained for an average of 14 years. They had trained in secret on remote bases under false names. They had trained for 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, for an average of 730 days per year. They had trained until the maneuvers were instinctive, until the tactics were memory, until the coordinates were burned into their minds like scars. The Vorkai supply lines ran through 12 choke points. LT Commander Yoon had mapped them 8 years ago. She had started with 47 possible choke points, every known supply route between Vorkai systems, every refueling station, every depot, every relay. She had narrowed the list to 12 over 3 years of analysis. She had verified each one with 4 independent data sources. She had run 1,200 simulations. The 12 choke points were not guesses, they were certainties. The Dark Fleet had been drilling those 12 coordinates for 11 years. Captain Cole's Black Manticore had run the simulation 1,400 times. The first 200 runs had been failures, margins too wide, timing too slow, coordination too sloppy. The next 400 had been acceptable. The last 800 had been perfect. The margin of error on the final 200 runs was 0.3 seconds. That was the difference between a successful mission and a failed one. 0.3 of 1 second. Vasquez stood at the 12-meter display. She was 61 years old. She had gray hair. She had a face that did not move much when she was thinking. She had lost 12 friends in training accidents over the 22 years of preparation, 12 people who had died in simulation or in construction or in the silent years of waiting. She had attended 7 funerals. She had written 12 letters to families. She had memorized 12 names that she would never say out loud. She looked at the display. "We hit all 12 choke points simultaneously," she said. The display showed the Vorkai Empire, 43 star systems, 1,200 ships, 300,000 troops. Overlaid on top of it were 12 red circles, the choke points. Each circle was a target. Each target was a system that the Vorkai could not fight without. Yoon's timings. Yoon's voice came from the intelligence station. Delta T of 4 seconds across the entire network, ma'am. That's the maximum allowable variance. Any more than that, and the Vorkai will have time to reorganize. Cole readiness. Cole's scarred hands rested on the edge of the tactical display. His voice was quiet. "All 47 ships, all crews, we've been ready for 11 years, ma'am." Vasquez nodded. "Then we go." The first Vorkai outpost went silent at 400 hours ship time. The outpost was called Vorith 7. It was a refueling station in the Vorith Kai system, a system that had been conquered 47 days ago. The station had been operational for 200 years. It had never been attacked. No one had ever tried. At 400 hours, its communication signal stopped. At 4:02, the second outpost went silent. This was a supply depot in the Vexar 3 system, 12 light-years from the Vorkai homeworld. The depot held 40,000 tons of deuterium fuel, enough to power the Vorkai fleet for 6 months. The fuel did not explode. The depot simply stopped transmitting. At 4:03, the third outpost went silent. A communication relay in the Drueth 9 system, named after the general's great-grandfather. The relay handled 70% of the Vorkai military's long-range communications in the outer systems. It stopped. At 4:10, the fourth. At 4:15, the fifth. At 4:22, the sixth. At 4:28, the seventh and eighth simultaneously. At 4:30, the ninth. By 4:30, 9 outposts had stopped transmitting. General Drueth received the first report at 4:32. He was on the bridge of the Vengeance of Vexar, reviewing the invasion plan for the human homeworld. The plan was 14 pages long. It estimated a victory within 48 hours. "General," the communication officer said, "we've lost contact with Vorith 7. Drueth did not look up. "Pirates," he said, "local insurgents, send a patrol." "General, we've also lost Vorith 3 and Vexar 4, and..." Drueth looked up. The communication officer's face was pale. Vorkai did not get pale, but this one did. "General, we have lost contact with 9 outposts in the last 30 minutes. Drueth stared at him. The fourth report arrived at 4:35. The fifth at 4:38, the sixth at 4:40. By 500, 31 Vorkai installations had gone dark across 14 systems. By 600, it was 44. The supply lines were gone. The communication network was crippled. The fuel depots were silent. 3 assault fleets, 1,200 ships, were stranded in deep space, their supply chains severed, their reinforcements cut off. 300,000 ground troops sat on transport vessels with no fuel, no ammunition resupply, and no orders. Drueth stood at the display. His scarred jaw was trembling. His hands were shaking. He had not shaken in 300 years. "Pirates," he said again, but his voice was weak. No one answered. The climax was not a battle. It was an execution. The Dark Fleet did not engage Vorkai capital ships. It did not fight fair. It did not give warning. It burned the infrastructure that supported the Vorkai war machine, the depots, the relays, the stations, the docks. One by one, system by system, the Vorkai Dominion's ability to wage war was systematically disconnected. The main planets, all 7 of them, were hit in a single coordinated wave. Not by 1,200 ships. By 47. The Black Manticore approached the Vorkai homeworld at 3:55 hours. Captain Cole stood on the bridge, his scarred hands resting on the command rail. The ship moved in silence. No active sensors, no communication, no lights. The Black Manta core had been designed for this, a stealth profile that reduced its sensor signature by 99.7%. The Vorkai orbital defense platform had been operational for 400 years. Its sensors had been calibrated to detect ships of 500 meters or larger. The Black Manta core was 498 meters long. It took 11 minutes. The approach vector had been practiced 1,400 times. Every turn, every burn, every adjustment had been drilled into the crew until it was instinct. Cole did not issue orders. He did not need to. The crew knew what to do. They had known for 11 years. The defense platform's guns never tracked them. At 4:06 hours, the Black Manta core fired. 3 missiles, each one targeted at a specific component of the defense platform's power grid. The missiles traveled at 0.7 times light speed. The platform's point defense systems activated 0.4 seconds after launch, too late. The missiles struck at 4:06 in 12 seconds. The platform went dark. By the end of the third day, the Vorkai Dominion had lost 47 star systems. Not conquered, not occupied, lost. The systems were still there, the planets, the populations, the infrastructure. But the infrastructure was gone, the fuel depots were empty, the communication relays were silent, the supply lines were severed, the Vorkai fleet was stranded, the Vorkai army was trapped. The Vorkai Empire had become 47 islands with no boats. The only thing left was the homeworld itself. Emperor Vexaron watched from his obsidian throne. Smoke rose from his capital city. The city was called Vexar Prime, named after the first emperor who had conquered the first system 847 years ago. The city had never been attacked. No enemy had ever reached the Vorkai homeworld. No enemy had ever come close. The smoke was from the orbital defense platform, or what remained of it. Debris rained down on the capital for 6 hours. The debris was hot. It started fires. The fires burned. The banners of 43 conquered systems hung behind Vexaron. They were all still there, the silk, the colors, the names woven into the fabric, but the systems they represented were no longer his. The Valith system gone, the Fennery system gone, the Balasi system gone, the Korvati system gone, the Vali system gone, the Tessari system gone. The 43 systems that had taken 600 years to conquer had been returned in 3 days. General Druoth stood beside the throne. His scarred jaw was trembling, his polished black scales were covered in ash. He had not slept in 48 hours. He had not eaten in 36. He had been trying to raise the fleet for 2 days. The fleet did not answer. The fleet could not answer. The fleet had no fuel. "How?" he whispered. Vexaron did not answer. His yellow eyes stared at the banners. The banners seemed to mock him now, each one a reminder of a conquest that meant nothing. "How did they do this?" Druoth said again, louder this time. "They're primitives. They have 89 ships. They have 47 ships we didn't know about," Vexaron said quietly. Druoth stopped. The Black Register of Vexaron continued. "Do you know what that is?" Druoth shook his head. It was filed 187 years ago, a list of warships, hidden in a bureaucratic subclause. No one read it, no one ever read it. Vexaron's voice was flat, tired, old. "They have been preparing for this for 187 years, Druoth, and we did not know." The final transmission arrived 4 hours later. It was broadcast on every Vorkai frequency, military, civilian, open channel. It came from a human source, but not from any ship the Vorkai had identified. It came from somewhere in the outer system, beyond the orbit of the gas giant, where the Vorkai sensors had never thought to look. The transmission was 7 words long. Admiral Myra Vasquez's voice was calm, quiet, the kind of voice that had said, "We accept your terms 3 days ago. You have never lost because you have never fought us." The transmission ended. The silence that followed was absolute. Kurasal sat alone in the recorder's chamber. The data slate was full. She had transcribed every transmission, every report, every timestamp from the last 3 days. She had written about the 12 choke points. She had written about the 47 ships. She had written about the 1,400 simulations. She had written about the 0.3-second margin of error. She had written about the 11 minutes. She had written about the 44 installations. She had written about the 47 systems. She had written about the 3 days. She read the final human transmission again. "You have never lost because you have never fought us." She read it 3 times. She thought about the words, "We accept your terms." She thought about the 600 years of Vorkai victories. She thought about the 43 systems taken. She thought about the species who bowed, the ones who had surrendered, who had accepted protectorate status, who had hung their banners on the wall. She thought about the species who did not. She wrote the final entry in her data slate. It was not a report, it was not an observation, it was a conclusion. The Vorkai Dominion believed that strength meant conquest. They believed that taking was the same as keeping. They believed that 600 years of victory meant they would never lose. They were wrong. Strength is not conquest. Strength is preparation. Strength is patience. Strength is 187 years of silence. Strength is a fleet that no one knew existed. Strength is an admiral who says we accept your terms and means something entirely different. The humans did not defeat the Vorka. The humans revealed them, and the galaxy will never forget. On Meridian Station, Admiral Myra Vasquez stood at the window. The window looked out at the mountains, the Rockies, golden in the fading light of the evening sun. She had not seen the mountains in 22 years. She had been underground in the war room in the darkness preparing. She had forgotten how beautiful they were. She held a cup of coffee. It was hot. It was the first hot coffee she had had in 3 days. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the steel ship, the canvas bags of coffee, the .50 caliber machine gun. She thought about his words, "The only people who brag about never losing are the people who have never fought anyone dangerous." She smiled. It was a small smile. It did not move much. Tomorrow she would go back to the war room. Tomorrow there would be new reports, new threats, new preparations. But tonight she stood at the window and watched the mountains and drank her coffee. On the Black Manticore, Captain Elias Cole stood on the bridge. The ship was dark, the crew was resting. The tactical displays were off. The only light came from the emergency panels and the distant glow of the stars outside. Cole touched his scarred hands. He thought about the 1,400 simulations. He thought about the 11 minutes. He thought about the 0.3 seconds. He thought about the 7 words. "You have never lost because you have never fought us." He had said nothing during the mission. He had not needed to. The crew had known what to do. They had known for 11 years. He nodded to himself. It was a small nod. It meant nothing to anyone else. But it meant everything to him. Petty Officer Marcus Webb sat in his quarters. The quarters were small, 3 meters by 4 meters, a bed, a desk, a chair. On the desk was a photograph. A 4-year-old girl with a gap-toothed smile and a stuffed animal named Space Bear. He had not seen her in 11 months. He picked up the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put it back in his helmet liner, where it would stay until he went home. This is a story about an empire that believed conquest was the only measure of strength, and a species that believed infrastructure was the only battlefield that mattered. The Vorkai bragged they had never lost. They were telling the truth. They had never lost because they had never fought an enemy who prepared for 22 years, who built 47 ships in secret, who drilled 12 choke points 1,400 times, who attended 7 funerals and wrote 12 letters and waited. When Earth finally answered the bragging, the answer was 7 words. "You have never lost because you have never fought us." The Vorkai had never fought humans. Now they had. And the galaxy quietly and without much fanfare adjusted accordingly.